what do some of us find so off-putting about modern art?
I mean, I consider myself a fan. Heck, the first few videos I made technically fall under that umbrella, but I can admit it's clearly not for everyone.
To the general populace, modern art can often feel inaccessible, needlessly complicated, and pretentious even. Some of us baffle at its perceived simplicity.
Look, I could research and explain the depth of someone like Roman Ziegner's work. People online are still gonna hate on it, but to some extent, I can see where they're coming from.
Just because I enjoy Pablo Picasso and Zdzisław Beksiński doesn't really mean I want their works hanging in my room. Like, I get art is supposed to be provocative and discomforting at times, but in this case, forgive me for being uncomfortable. There's a part of me that thinks this cultural aversion to modern art stems from a similar public disinterest in silent cinema.
Look, I'm not trying to be a pretentious film student, I'm just incidentally that way.
But let's be honest, on movie nights with friends, none of us are throwing on Buster Keaton for a good laugh. Sound and color create a much more engaging experience for your average audience member. While the sheer spectacle of moving images was what put butts in theater seats a century ago, immersion is what's valued in Hollywood nowadays.
This has led many people to think of silent film as being too rudimentary to enjoy. The genesis of an art form that wasn't truly understood until the likes of Orson Welles and Alfred Hitchcock.
What we fail to acknowledge is that, even in its earliest forms, people were already pushing film far beyond the purposes of narrative storytelling. The moving image practically doubled the methods visual artists already had to create and express. Stand bracket, anyone?
With film's global popularity practically exploding in the 20s, many European artists found this newfangled medium to be the perfect playground for another art movement that was gaining popularity.
Dadaism is an art form that's hard to describe because it's actively hostile to the idea of things being describable in the first place. Essentially, it was a cultural anti-art response to World War I, pioneered by figures like Marcel Duchamp and Kurt Schwitters, later popularized by everyone's favorite anteater walker Salvador Dali. Dadaism embraced the horrors of the trenches with absurdity and madness. After all, how does one make sense of the unprecedented industrial death machine that was the Great War? What is the point of holding to propriety when we're capable of such evil? These artists clowned on traditional art for trying to find order and meaning in the world, but not in a jovial, silly kind of way. More like... One of the most famous Dada works is entitled Fountain by Marcel Duchamp. It was his submission for the inaugural exhibition of the Society of Independent Artists, and is literally just a urinal that he turned sideways and signed with a different name.
Oh yeah, it's that kind of art.
No rules.
It really wasn't long before Dada made its boisterous presence known on the silver screen, with one of the most famous, or infamous being, oh god no, don't show the clip! While many artists attempted to bring Dada to life with film, including the aforementioned Louis Buñuel, I think one of the most important figures is Hans Richter. Despite being named the German equivalent of John Smith, Richter was anything but ordinary. Graphic artist, painter, writer, filmmaker, this Renaissance man was so influential in the Avant Garde world, it's impossible to bring up Dada without mentioning him. You could say he pretty much wrote the book on Dada, except he literally did.
Richter is also prominently featured in a lot of documentaries about the history of Dada. As a matter of fact, my explanation earlier wasn't really the best, so why don't I just let the man himself do it?
I don't have to explain Dada. You all know what Dada is.
Cool. I guess I'll go F myself.
Dada art, Alphabet of German Dada, from 1968 is the one I would recommend, seeing as its use of recycled footage and montage editing is faithful to the movement. Plus it gives me a lot of nice B-roll for this video. It's very much a patchwork of archival footage, interviews, and art pieces, like a museum on film. Unfortunately, this is the best copy I could find.
I am, before anything else, a documentary nerd. Hell, you don't own these two books unless you are. Speaking of which, I might do a video on them one day. What I want to focus on today is actually this book, Hans Richter, Activism, Modernism, and the Avant Garde, edited by Stephen C. Foster.
It's a collection of essays written about Richter's work, his philosophy, and even a translated manuscript for his demonstration of a universal language.
Now, I've read every essay in this book, some of them even all the way through. Point being, everything that you see me cite when we start to look at Richter's films is from this book. I just want to be transparent about the sources I'm using because I got drunk during the Christmas episode and cited a Wikipedia article. I'm sorry for my intellectual crime. It will happen again. Anyways, without further ado, let's look at some of the ways that Richter brought Dadaism to film.
Hans Richter made this film in his animation studio in 1921, but was dissatisfied and kept adding elements to it until 1923, hence why there are two versions, Rhythmus 21 and Rhythmus 23. This is one of the earliest examples of absolute film, a genre that places abstract imagery above narrative storytelling. What interests me the most is how it aesthetically reflects Richter's ventures into Constructivism. Like Dada, Constructivism sought to break art down to its fundamental elements, rejecting stylization in favor of simple structures that reflect modern urban society. Basically, it's drawing the viewer's attention to the building blocks of composition and expression, while also commenting on industrialization's impact on our lives. Hans was obsessed with not only finding a way to incorporate this philosophy into his own work, but using it to represent movement. While he painted many picture roles in service of this desire, Rhythmus was meant to bring it to life. In that regard, these films are meant to be bare bones, to make the audience aware of the composition and musicality of film. Yes, despite being a silent film, through its movement, Rhythmus suggests the occurrence of sound like an orchestra without notes. Imagine watching this for the first time in Weimar, Germany. How alien the imagery must have been as it echoes the percussive rhythm of the film projector. I know I keep bringing him up, but with the importance he also gave rhythmic editing in his films, I wonder if Stan Brakhage was a fan of Richter's. Something I couldn't help but notice was the shape's resemblance to his aforementioned universal language proposal. There is something about fluid and moving images that communicates more effectively than stagnant written language. Richter also made a Rhythmus 25. Now, supposedly it was in color, something else Richter aspired to in his films, which only makes it more unfortunate that it was lost. Only sketches remain, giving us a tantalizing glimpse at one of Richter's missing works.
In 1926, Richter made a switch to traditional camera work, and thus Filmstudia is his first film that deals with specific real-life imagery. Despite this, it still carries a lot of his constructivist tendencies.
Watching the film, one can clearly see it has greater visual depth than Rhythmus. This is due to Richter using the actual mechanisms of his camera to play with the frame. In Hans Richter, Constructivist Filmmaker, an essay by Justin Hoffman, he writes,
Richter departed from animation and shot instead a woman's face, birds, eyeballs, and a man hammering. Even if he altered these motifs by crossfading or by transforming them with trick lenses into ornamental constructions, he returned to the language of images that Cinema Pure had already formulated.
Richter's demonstration of these techniques is the film's whole purpose, to study the elements of itself. It's in the title, guys. One of the most recurring images is the eyes circling and reflecting on one another, illustrating the most essential aspect of the film experience, sight. A similarly striking shot, in my opinion, is the woman whose eyes chain together in an infinite string of doppelgangers. In essence, the most important aspects of cinema are vision and light. It all reminds me of something one of my film professors said to my class about the essence of filmmaking. A cryptic piece of wisdom that has mystified me to this day. Without photons bouncing all around us and the eyes that receive them, the universe would simply cease to be.
In 1928, Richter began work on two other films, Ray Symphony and Inflation. Not that kind of inflation!
Both of these films more closely resemble what people would call movies today. They're much less concerned with finding harmony in the abstract. In fact, Richter's aim was to communicate a concise and, in one case, political message, in contrast to his previous works. The cultural context can be found in another piece of writing, Richter's Films and the Role of the Radical Artist, an essay by Marion von Hofacker. God, I hope I'm saying that right.
Richter's Inflation is an essay film, a semi-documentary film form used to express concrete ideas, and a form that Richter aptly applied to his first work addressing a social, political subject. Every viewer recognized the message because it was everyone's story.
This story is something Richter makes very apparent by employing one of cinema's oldest techniques, the Kuleshov Effect.
For those of you that don't know, this may seem obvious once I start to explain it, but it is a quintessential psychological phenomenon that is at the heart of every movie you've ever seen.
Lev Kuleshov was a Russian filmmaker who built off the prevailing Soviet montage theory. In an experiment, he edited together several sequences that juxtaposed a shot of actor Ivan Mozhuzkin with either a bowl of soup, a person in a coffin, or a woman lounging around. The theory was that the audience would assign a different emotion to the man's blank expression based on the following image: hungry, sad, lustful. In Inflation, the juxtaposition between money, products, and people tells a story with shots that, independent of each other, carry little to no meaning. To any contemporary viewer, it was so obviously about the economic depression that gripped the whole world at the time, which was especially bad for interwar Germany.
I want you guys to know that every time someone uses the word juxtaposition in relation to cinema, a film student gets their wings. And by wings, I mean an Ari Fresnel kit.
Race Symphony, which somehow has a dodgier title than Inflation, continues with the semi-documentary style, but this time in a more observational form. All of it is clearly shot on location with non-actors, from the streets of Berlin to the famous Hofacker racing track. The acceleration of modern life reminds me of the fast-paced motion of documentaries like Koyanis Katsi, a commentary on societal values of speed and efficiency. On the surface, this film is about a horse race, but I believe much of it harkens back to the Rhythmus series on its emphasis of, rhythm. What I especially love is how it uses repeated shots, jump cuts, and crossfading to portray this without the use of sound. While the climax is a flurry of panic shots of the racetrack and people betting on it, so much of the film's buildup is outside, focused on everything else.
I can tell a lot about Hans Richter based on what he decided to put in this film.
Imagine being at a racetrack, taking in all the sights and sounds, the palpable excitement of the crowd. Now imagine you're someone like Hans Richter, observant, mindful. You find similar stimulation in the hustle and bustle of urban life. People watching. It's a part of the collective heartbeat that we all move to. In fact, explicitly musical things in the environment are only part of the universal metronome, this pulse that keeps the world moving. Alan Watts once said something along the lines of, "If our lives are valued by where they end up, then we should value musical pieces by how quickly and spectacularly they end." I'm paraphrasing, of course, his lecture is much longer. But essentially, life is not a race to the finish line. It's like music, meant to be enjoyed while it lasts. But I think Richter held to a belief that synthesized both of these things. If planet Earth now moves faster than it ever has before, then maybe there's a small pleasure to be found in the rush. There's a quiet little song that everyone could enjoy if we just paid attention to it. The percussion of people walking, the wall of sound emanating from a cheering stadium. Because to Richter, life is a race and a symphony.
So what happens when you combine Richter's constructivist experimentation, his montage editing, and his understanding of the socio-political climate of his time? You get arguably his most controversial film, and by extension, his most famous.
Vormittagsspuk, or Ghosts Before Breakfast, looks like the film you imagine when you want to make fun of art house cinema. Although incidental, the cryptic scenery and stilted animation establish an uneasy feeling. This makes the rest of Richter's work look like Dr. Seuss. Like, if you told me these were from the Cursed Ring VHS tape, then I guess I only have 7 days to finish this video. The ominous vibes are not helped by the fact that most contemporary versions of this film start with this intro. The Nazis destroyed the sound version of this film as degenerate art. It shows that even objects revolt against regimentation. This lost sound version was scored by German-American composer Paul Hindemith and was meant to be automated on a player piano alongside the film. For those of you who don't know what a player piano is, like that, but less fun.
These are the kinds of stories in film history that I live for. Because now we have something to speculate on while we watch. What would the Third Reich find so offensive about this film?
Like most of Richter's work, Ghosts Before Breakfast has a specific cinematic tempo, established by a ticking clock that frames the whole film. This more than likely synced up with the lost soundtrack, but it's hard to say how. After an hour passes on the clock, we cut to the first shot of one of our recurring characters.
The flying bowler hats.
Oh, that's why I'm wearing this!
Throughout the film, these hats fly around, resting in trees and evading anything that tries to catch them. There's also many shots of people walking forward and backwards, moving up and down ladders. These angles isolate the actor's face to emphasize the movement, unlike the dignified personhood Richter affords the moving crowds in his other films. The most comedic scene shows a man fighting his own bow tie to stay on his neck. It's very Tom and Jerry with the visual humor, but here is where I think you can finally see what the introduction was talking about. These are objects revolting against their own regimentation. In other words, not doing what they're supposed to. Clothing articles particles shouldn't fly away, heads shouldn't float when you try to shoot them, fire hoses don't unravel themselves and spray the flying clothes, and men don't teleport away behind street lamps. I don't care what the media says, it's all bullshit!
It's worth mentioning how Richter's previous techniques are being used here.
Animation, crossfading, photo negatives, even some clever visual effects. You can especially see some of Kuleshov's influence on Richter with some of these shots. An association is made between the hats and a flock of seagulls by cutting from one to the other, and thus we interpret their actions as being avian solely through their juxtaposition. Oh, sweet, an Ari Fresnel kit!
But just like in Inflation, Hans Richter has created a very potent, albeit much more cryptic, political message. Von Hofacker writes,
Today's viewer might question how rhythm can become a political satire, but at the time of the shooting of Vormittagsbook, in the mid-20s, the objects and images used in the film had meanings or connotations which would have been obvious to a contemporary viewer.
With the context of pre-war Germany in mind, you might be able to glean some of this satire. One of the most obvious ones, in my opinion, is the firearm, in how it's being both deconstructed and misused. A symbol of violence being shown in this way would have been very politically charged in the interwar period for Germany, as many were concerned with the rising power of the far right. I mean, just look at how swastically they move. Did I just make fascism an adverb?
what I think is less obvious to modern viewers is the symbolism behind the bowler hat.
In the German culture of the 19th century, hats that fly from people's heads were a sign of existential danger looming in the near future. The hat was the quintessence of a bourgeoisie citizen and the symbol of the status quo. Pictures and words indicating that hats no longer fitted well and were threatening to slip off heads indicated that society's stability was in danger.
Popularized by 20th century propaganda, the top hat is a more recognizable symbol of wealth and the ruling class. After all, there's a reason it has been used in cartoons and movies as a gendered signifier of status. However, Richter wasn't only aiming his criticism at the ruling class, he was aiming it at all of us.
The use of the bowler hat perhaps signifies that it isn't just the bourgeoisie that risked societal collapse. It was predominantly worn by the working class, which is why we associate an actor like Charlie Chaplin with the everyman, and a character like Ebenezer Scrooge with aristocracy. It's an essential part of visual storytelling.
Want to see me do a politically subversive act? Given the layers of depth in just one subject in this film, it's incredible to imagine how many hidden meanings there might still be in Ghosts Before Breakfast. I asked a couple of my friends to watch this movie, and they had some pretty interesting takeaways.
My friend Mike saw some of the sexual politics in the humans present in the film. The series of shots here show 4 men and 4 women. As the sequence continues, the men gradually lose their beards and the women have their hair cut. Also, hi Hans, there's your director's cameo. The Kuleshov effect in this sequence led him to believe that the 2 groups were observing each other, despite not sharing the same frame. We then cut to a down-barrel shot of 4 pistols, something he read as phallic imagery. Such objects being associated with weapons and manhood turn this film's meaning towards another politically oppressed group in wartime Germany: women.
My other friend Michael read a bit deeper into the male characters and saw a gendered connection between them and their clothing.
Despite how I've been dressed throughout this whole video, hats and bow ties are generally seen as masculine clothing, and anything along the lines of Marlene Dietrich or Zatanna is a satire of this trope. We see a man struggling to keep his bow tie on, and others failing to catch their hats before they fly away. In other words, these men are helpless to keep their symbols of masculinity under control. They scramble frantically to maintain this identity, and when they can't, through the use of weaponry, they lash out at women. This potentially adds another layer to the political interpretations of Ghosts Before Breakfast, seeing as Weimar Germany had one of the biggest research centers on gender studies and homosexuality before you-know-who came to town.
Now, a lot of my friends had similar ideas, some of them had different ones completely, and some of them didn't know what to make of it at all. Either way, we couldn't come to a consensus about what Hans Richter was trying to say. And I think that's the point.
Characteristically, Richter does not describe the irrational happenings as subversive. On the contrary, he claims the story is created by the flow of visual images, which always make a story, whether there is one or not. That is how our mind works.
You create that story. Every blink, every cut, every transition is a piece of the narrative that only you get to have. It is the fact that there really is no one way to read this film that the Reich found it so offensive. Fascism is concerned with creating social hierarchies, in and out groups, and using violence to threaten dissenters. Fascism believes that people are either beneficial or detrimental to society. The former even have a blood right to their land that the others might currently be on. Sex is explicitly procreative and should only be explored in matrimony between man and woman, the two immutable genders. In fact, men should not only exclusively be with women, but they should have control over them too, as is the natural order. Anyone who says otherwise is a degenerate plague on our great nation, and they will be dealt with.
It is precisely the aim of Ghost Before Breakfast to erode these categories by letting objects resist their intended use and the supposed order that humanity needs to function. They revolt against their own regimentation. To acknowledge the absurdity of reality is to accept things as they are, uncategorizable, and thus contrary to the tenets of fascism.
I don't think Richter was trying to troll the Nazis by making art that they specifically hated. At least it wasn't his main goal. He was just using his art to deconstruct the systems that he lived under, a crime that they actually found to be much worse. It wasn't enough to simply ban degeneracy. It had to be destroyed. That is precisely why there's no more sound version of Ghost Before Breakfast, another grave in the cemetery of art that was killed by fascism. To say that art shouldn't be political is to completely ignore what art is, and what it's been doing for the last century.
Something that I find beautiful is that when you look up Ghosts Before Breakfast, you find many people who, either for school projects or their sound design portfolio, rescored the film's soundtrack. Some of them even very cleverly use sound to enhance those associations created by the Kuleshov Effect. I have so much fun watching these, but I also believe that Hans Richter himself would have too. I imagine that if you asked him which one was the closest to the original, he would shrug. It doesn't matter. I'm not an authority. The film is whatever you want to make it. To quote the man himself, I don't need to explain Dada. You already know what Dada is.
Ideas are powerful. And if fascism seeks to destroy certain lines of thinking, then the rest of us know that those ideas are the most powerful. It's often said that history isn't in the past. It's happening right here, right now. Everything that we do is in the hopes of creating a better future. But we don't get there by being comfortable. Let art disgust you, provoke you, challenge your very being. Be open to the ways that it can completely change your mind. Because Hans Richter teaches us that no matter how oppressive the forces that beat down upon you are, no one can rob you of your ability to dream. Hey guys, thanks for watching. You see, you guys thought that this was a video about Dadaism, but it's actually a thinly veiled excuse to show off my hat collection. It's a little back-heavy. Anyways, a lot of time and research went into making this video, and I really wanted to go all out, and frankly, I think it's the best one I've made so far. I didn't even finish it, what am I saying?
Also, to follow in the tradition of reconstructing lost soundtracks, I made most of the synth music for this video.
I said in my update video that I wanted to try to do different stuff with this channel, but I made it very clear that I'm not abandoning this format. I love putting on costumes and getting in front of the camera and nerding out. So yeah, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, give me a like, and leave a comment. What's your opinion on fascism? No, but seriously, as you all know, I love responding to your comments. I love engaging with the community. We're all talking about film. Let's all nerd out together. But yeah, stay tuned for more, and I can't wait to catch you guys next time.
Today's viewer might question how rhythm can be a political satire, but at the time of shooting Wort mit Touchbuck, I'm going to find the hardest word for you to ever pronounce. I'm going to find it and put it in a video script just to you over a little bit. And my Kristy had me fucking saying Vor Mittag Spuck. Even with the fucking pronunciation, I still couldn't say that shit. And I'm an anime YouTuber, dude. I pronounce shit I have no idea how to pronounce all the time. I make mistakes. There's mistakes in my videos if you look hard enough. And even I have to say, F you, how could you do this to me? Love you, girl.